In construction, you spend all day, every day making sausage. What I mean by that is that there's a lot that goes into producing the final product of a completed project, and there are a lot of parties involved in that process. One of the biggest challenges that construction companies have is building trust between the owners, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the subs, the suppliers. And building and maintaining trust is essential if a construction project is going to go as smoothly as possible. The question is, how do you do that? That is the topic of my conversation today with my guest, Andrew Zukoski. Andrew is the CEO and co founder of Join, the leading construction decision making platform. If you listen to this podcast, you know that I have a lot of these tech CEOs come on my show. And the reason I do that is because they have an outsider's perspective on some of the biggest challenges that the construction industry is facing. The one thing I like about Andrew is that his company is driven by a number of values, including one which is humility. And what he means by that is that he doesn't think that software is the answer for everything, but it is part of the answer to some of the biggest challenges that you have in your organization. In our conversation today, we spend a lot of time talking about how to build trust apart from anything to do with software. So you're going to get a tremendous amount of value from listening to that conversation. He tells us the story about how an owner came into a meeting with a bag from Home Depot with about $50 worth of parts and supplies, questioning why a change order was $1,000 and how that change order of $1,000 on a $100 million project violated trust because of a lack of understanding on the owner's part and a lack of communication on the contractor's part. We use that story to pivot into that discussion about trust and how you can build and maintain that on every construction project that you're involved in. Feel free to share this interview with other people. And one thing I would request as before you dive into this interview today is, will you please go to wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be Apple or Spotify, wherever the case is, and give us a rating and a review, because that helps Construction Genius to be seen by other people. It helps us to grow as a program. So enjoy my interview with Andrew, and thank you today for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Andrew, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you, Eric.
I know in my work with contractors over the years, one of the biggest challenges that they have in executing a project profitably is developing trust with all the parties that are involved in the construction project, from the owners to the designers to the subs and to the project partners. I'm looking forward to diving into that topic here today. And so to begin with, I'd like you to start us off here by giving us a picture of what you think trust means in a construction project.
I think that trust in a construction project means that every stakeholder, and speaking primarily of the owner, any owner's representatives, the principal design consultants, the general contractor, and the principal trades, but that each one of those believes that all of their partners and stakeholders are going to be straightforward in presenting what they need to move the overall project forward. It isn't to say that everybody's going to go completely open book and share their profit margins or work to erode the profitability of their firm. But it means that every stakeholder has this belief when people share things with them that it's going to be true and it's going to accurately represent best extent that the other stakeholders can, the truth about where that stakeholder is, where the project is, and where they see the opportunities to move the project forward.
Let's just explore that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting. That's one of the things that, contractors immediately are thinking about when you talk about being straightforward, is like, hold on a second. There's I don't want to show everyone how the sausage is made exactly. So to what extent is it necessary for someone to go in order to begin to create that trust? Describe that a little bit, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll just share one of my favorite anecdotes around where trust was lost when it didn't need to be, as a way to illustrate some of the things that need to come together to make it happen. And one of the big challenges that's particular to construction around building trust, which is the need to be able to understand and present information in a way that other people can understand. So in this example, it came from a customer of ours where they were describing, I think it was about a $100 million job, medical project, and they were in an OAC meeting. The architect had brought some new version of plans. They were reviewing the plans, talking about it. Someone mentioned like, "Oh, we're going to install this new piece of equipment in this room that like we hadn't talked about previously. We're going to need an add an outlet." Someone looked to the GC and said, "Okay, like what's it going to cost to add an outlet to this room?" And the general contractor threw out, $1,000, like rough numbers, $1,000 to add an outlet to this room. And conversation moved on, and the contractor missed that the owner sat back and crossed their arms and was looking unhappy. And that actually, unbeknownst to the contractor, was a moment where trust was lost. And they figured it out at the next meeting where the owner showed up carrying a bag, Home Depot bag, and everyone else was sitting down at the table. And they walked in and they pour the contents of the bag on the table and slam down the receipt and start yelling, "How can you tell me it's $1,000 to add an outlet? That's outrageous. Like you're taking me for a ride. You're trying to nickel and dime me to profitability. I went to Home Depot and I bought everything you need to put an outlet in. I bought a faceplate, and I bought an outlet, I bought some wire, and I bought some conduit. Like it cost me $49. Like how can you look me in the eye and tell me it's going to cost $1,000?" And what do you do at that juncture, right? Like clearly we're in a bad place. And so the key thing here is that trust there got broken because the owner hadn't seen enough of how the sausage was made and didn't understand enough about sort of where sausage came from to trust the general contractor when they said it was $1,000. So saying it was $1,000 and just moving on, they were missing the opportunity to explain to the owner, like, well, this is a room the electrical inspector wasn't going to have to visit at all. So that adds like some schedule complications there. And, it's not just the outlet, like, it's a pretty long run and like there's several trades involved. And by the way, you have very high standards written into the spec for this project because it's a medical facility and the bargain option at Home Depot probably isn't going to cut it, meeting the performance requirements that you have. And all of this adds up to rough numbers. It's $1,000. That context was missing. That was all implicit in the general contractor. They looked at the project and they knew that instantly because they are construction experts. But the owner wasn't, and they weren't taken along to understand the work that went in and other people's perspectives and everything that went into this decision they were being asked to make. As a result, they didn't trust what they were being presented with, which has awful repercussions for the rest of the project. I mean, if this owner went to Home Depot for $1,000 change on $100 million project, like you have to make million and $10 million decisions through the course of a project like this. What are they going to do to like get comfortable with some of those larger decisions? They're going to drag out for weeks or months longer than they need to, and there's going to be consequences for like the level of relationship for everyone that's there and the level of stress that everybody brings into it, and they'll end up firing different people on the project, not for good reasons, simply because they've lost trust. That's an anecdote we come back to pretty often in understanding it.
It's really interesting because what you described there so well is the reality that in a construction project, there is often these gaps of understanding that can only be filled by context. And that to fill that context, it requires conscious communication between the two parties.
Or more than two parties, right? A lot of things that we focus on decisions, I'm just going to talk about like particular decisions, but in a lot of this stuff, you're looking to change the floor to floor height in a building. Clearly, you need to talk to the general contractor, probably need to talk to the concrete trade contractor if they're subbing that out. Probably electrical, mechanical, other systems like structural engineer, architect, owner, potentially multiple people from the owner because it's got construction as well as sort of like development or pro forma like implicate. Like there's a bunch of people that have to come together. We think this is a consequence of the inherent complexity and uniqueness of construction projects. We were at a site of a new CLT project that's coming up in the Bay Area. It was an early project with Join, and it's sort of exciting to see come out of it. They threw out there, the PM mentioned, there's hundreds of thousands of screws in this building holding. That number, that's pretty close to an airplane. That's pretty close to like the Boeing 737, the Boeing 747, these like incredibly complex machines that we build. Every Boeing jet rolls off of an assembly line, in Everett, Washington, that you used to be able to go visit. It's an amazing tour, but like they're all the same. And every building is apparently just as complex, but each one is built uniquely. And it means that for every project, there's more complexity than fits in any one person's head. The only way to get a commercial construction project out of the ground is to bring together divergent stakeholders, each of whom have a few pieces of the puzzle. To understand building code compliance, it's a whole career to become an expert in this. To be able to design spaces will encourage like a good learning atmosphere. That's a whole career there. There's no way that we could expect a person to bring those puzzle pieces to the table and also be able to bring to the table things like cost or constructability or scheduling issues. Necessarily, there's like different people who have deep insight in one domain, but that insight needs to be coordinated with the perspective from these other participants who often have assembled only for like this particular project, and maybe they work together again in the future, and maybe everybody rides off into the sunset to work on other jobs. And they got to come together, build some trust, and then learn to see eye to eye, learn to speak enough of each other's language that, when they say, hey, it's $1,000, it gets through and the recipient of the information can actually understand it and is able to dig into it where they need to build more of an understanding.
It's interesting as well because you're describing well that different trades have different specialties and different depths of understanding. And then you might be dealing with an owner who this is the one project that they're going to be building for their all time or for the next 5, 10 years. And they're doing the Home Depot runs because they get pissed at $1,000. And because of that gap, because of the unknown, because of the inherent insecurity perhaps that an owner has because of the fact that they're writing a check for a whole bunch of money and they need to get a project delivered on time and on budget, there's that insecurity that drives these kinds of overreactions when there's a lack of clarity or a lack of communication.
I think insecurity drives a lot of this. I think another thing that drives it is the ongoing shift in delivery methods that's going on in our
Mm.
industry. So this shift from a hard bid, design bid build, plans and specs worlds to one that looks more like design build, construction manager at risk, CMGC, maybe IPD every once in a while.
Yep.
In the old world, there's not a lot of overlap between the construction team and the design phase. You design the building and then you bid it and then you build it, right? That's the whole idea. And it means that there are fewer opportunities to communicate well. The communication basically comes down to a bid and then hopefully not many change orders through the course of construction. In this new world, like you're winning the job and keeping the job, not based on hitting the low bid, but on your ability to communicate early, demonstrate that you'll be a good partner. You're going to take the owner on a journey that's going to get them to a good place. Like often we see our customers, they're presenting in proposals for these negotiated work, not a final number. They're showing past projects and they're saying, look, we have a history of starting projects here and getting them down to here. And it's a lot of work over several years to get a big job down and 20% budget and keep the owner happy. You're communicating that and giving people trust about the journey. Then you got to keep that up throughout. I mean, like we were talking to a company that is now a customer who was describing a job they had won 3 times. The same job. We talked to other customers about how they built their businesses on hard bid work, but they've realized the majority is negotiated and it's not going back. And they keep getting fired from negotiated jobs, not because they're not acting in the client's best interest, right? They are doing a good job. They're acting in the client's best interest. It's just they're not communicating enough that the client trusts that. And those communication skills, and it's a bunch of work. It's a lot of work to be able to do this communication in a way that people understand. And this is holding back a lot of businesses. It's leading to owners putting jobs back out on the street. It's leading to decision timelines dragging on, which leads to late compression instead of early compression. And it's a problem.
Let's just go back to your definition of trust. That is the belief that all parties involved are going to be straightforward. And so that's so interesting, right? Because there's an element there of subjectivity. There's a tremendous element of subjectivity. And in your experience, how do the best contractors, whether they be subs or generals, begin to build that sense of confidence? The straightforward aspect is going to be expressed and maintained throughout the building project.
Yeah, it's great. I'll share a little bit about this project I mentioned here in the Bay Area. We just toured it. Most of our exposure with our customers is in the pre construction phase. This project is well into construction. They've actually carried forward our tool into the construction phase, and that's why we were talking to them. But they described how this was the best job that they've ever worked on because of the high level of trust. And I'm not saying that's attributable to the technology, right? It's something that teams do and decide to invest in, and technology supports. But what they focused on was really from the outset in how people were going to work, and that they early on brought together the core stakeholders that were going to work together. They made mutual commitment around sharing their work. This wasn't an IPD job. It's not like an open book shared risk model, but people are going to share their work and they're going to show what's going on and what's important to them, and they're going to make it understandable to the people around them. This means that they can be held accountable. If they have a meeting where they realize they're over budget in some area and they say, like, we've committed to bringing forward 10 priced ideas that we have that might bring down the budget. If those aren't there a week from then, 2 weeks from then, whenever it's supposed to be done, that's going to be really clear to every other stakeholder. And they're not going to obfuscate that miss. But at the same time, if they bring those forward and the owner says no to all of them, if they're showing their work, it's really easy to say, like, yeah, we're still over budget. We did all this work and you can see the work that we did. It's right there for you to take a look at. Don't take our word for it. You can see the work we did to come up with and price all these ideas, and you rejected all of them. Accountability actually is on your end that we're still over budget in this way. And that mutual sharing and showing of work makes sort of the project state a little bit more objective. It's not something that needs to come from a person to understand the current state. We can look at it a little bit more dispassionately. Yeah, there are going to be some times where like someone's screwed up. Like, and it actually does just come down to someone who needs to take the blame. But by divorcing it from a particular person or a particular stakeholder, we see that it's easy for people to come together in a relaxed and a collaborative fashion and say, like, yeah, okay, we're in trouble here. We think we can get to here. We don't know all the way of how we're going to get it. Who else has ideas? As opposed to circling around like the trade that's way over budget and everybody pointing fingers at them and yelling at them and them not having easy ways to substantiate all the work that they've done or how they've been let down by the design team or that the owners held up decisions or the owner isn't accepting the options they're bringing forward. That making it objective goes a long way, and doing it early.
Let's explore that a little bit more. It seems that trust is built on an agreement of what is true or an agreement of what the parameters are of the project that we are committed to.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. In your experience working with construction companies and with designers and owners, in your mind, who has the greatest opportunity at the earliest possible point for initiating this virtuous cycle of building trust?
The owner, absolutely.
So to me, that's a problem though, right? Because how many enlightened owners are out there? If I'm a contractor, I know that if I go to the owner and say, hey, listen, we want to deliver the project to you on time, on budget, and with high quality. And the owner's like, exactly. Now do whatever it needs to be done to get that done. And they're not necessarily interested in the most innovative ways of doing it. They just want a building built. So how do we not get around that necessarily, but how do we work within that reality?
Yeah, most of the time, owners aren't going to come forward and say, like, okay, architect and there might be like five owners in the world
Yeah,
who are
right.
sophisticated enough to dictate how the other project team members are going to work together.
Yeah.
And this is why we're tackling this problem right now. We think it comes down to the delivery method. And that's a really key decision that the owner makes that sets up a lot of financial incentives for different team members that aligns them better with overall project success than a hard bid, make your money on change orders incentive structure might, and that brings the construction team in, much earlier and has more opportunities for overlap.
So let me just ask you, in your view, as you're looking at the construction industry in the next 5 to 10 years, what are the one or two delivery methods that will continue to gain prominence that will impact this idea of building trust?
Yeah, I'd say the construction manager at risk delivery method and progressive design build. I think hard bid design build is better in many respects than a design bid build methodology, but still requires quite a lot to be figured out and committed to very early without this process of discovery and refinement that happens while the design is being developed. And so I think methods that still align everybody's financial incentives around overall project success, but have a softer commitment earlier where you're not necessarily buying the ticket to take the ride, but making some commitments up front and are able to work to refine the exact parameters and scope and in cost. I think these are the two ones that have sort of the biggest potential impact going forward.
What is your recommendation then for a contractor when it comes to progressive design build? Because we all know situations where contractors put a ton of sweat, blood, tears, and cash into winning a project and they never get it, or they get to a certain point. Maybe they've made a couple of bucks on it, but because the owner makes certain decisions, they don't go forward. So, how should a contractor be positioning themselves in order to use these types of delivery methods and yet do so profitably without, banging their heads against the wall?
I think one thing to do is really assert the value of pre-construction services, that engagement in that early phase. And this varies regionally, and it's going to vary by owner type and owner sophistication, but being unashamed in asserting the value of what's being brought to the table,
What
which
do you
means
mean
that
by
there's
asserting the value? Give me an example of that.
like, hey, we'd love to engage with you on this project during this first phase, and this is going to be the bill for our work on an ongoing basis. That's one piece. There's also, education that can happen around a lot of the sausage making, right? Especially in pre-construction where nothing is visibly happening, but like a ton of work has to happen. Happens out of sight, out of mind, having ways to surface that and explain it to the owner and make sure they're involved and that they can see the work happening and understand everything that's going in. We see that. I'm recommending this because we see a lot of our customers pulling join into even their pursuit process as a way to articulate to owners like, hey, this is the journey, for example, in a progressive design build job that we're going to go on together to get to eventual final price, and final scope. And here's our understanding of the project now. And here's the view you'll have and the transparency you'll have. And this is a bunch of work and it's valuable work that we're doing and no one else can do it. And we shouldn't have to put our firm underwater in order to engage in this speculative loss leader ahead of making money on the actual construction project.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because that then it makes it absolutely vital that a contractor understands their sales process or the process of winning a project and understands where the value points are so that they can be assertive in getting paid where they deserve to get paid.
I think you can see this happening if you look at there's a range of sort of adoption and embrace of these collaborative pre-construction forward methods of delivery, and you can see this in how firms engage with it. We have some where they built their business on hard bid and they're realizing the ground is shifting under them and they're sort of waking up and realizing that they need to invest in this area, and you have others that have been doing nothing but this for 20 years. But the folks that are catching up are hiring new professionals. They're reorganizing their departments. They're hiring design manager roles. If they don't have dedicated pre-construction roles to complement like their estimating department, they're beginning to break that out. Often they're centralizing pre-construction. Some firms it's been scheduled like split either across regional office or across business line. And it's not to say that that's incorrect, but by pulling together what previously had been potentially inconsistent, ill coordinated efforts that lived inside of maybe one person at an office into a more dedicated function that probably has more senior leadership that's able to speak for it and advocate for it and coordinate it with business development and marketing activities. It's professionalizing a lot of this early phase stuff. And as you professionalize it, you're able to better explain it, you're able to better articulate the value it brings. And we think it's both right and fair, get paid for it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Okay, so let's go back to this topic of trust then. Ideally, it would begin with the owner, but let's say you're a contractor and you're either dealing with a unsophisticated owner or an owner that perhaps requires a lot of hand holding. What are some very practical steps that you can begin to execute on immediately to begin that trust cycle, get that going?
I think another key stakeholder to bring in that's going to be an important ally in educating the owner is going to be the design partner. Probably first step is really solidifying relationship with the key individuals there.
Yeah.
Our customers talk about how they do a lot of repeat design build work, often with the same firms. And once you've done a few of these jobs, like all the maybe not the owners because they're not sophisticated, they don't do as many of these projects, but the participants, they kind of get it and they walk in ready to trust and ready to rock and roll. And it turns out that's not firm by firm. It's actually individual by individual and team by
It's
team
interesting, isn't
that's
it? Yeah.
necessary. And yeah, it's very interesting. It just shows like construction is this like one of the things about this industry is as much as we're doing to shorten construction cycles, it still takes 5 or 7 years to get a substantial project like designed and built, and maybe 4 for something that's on the smaller side. And the result is, if you're involved in a project end to end, you don't need all your fingers to count your career. That's just the truth of it, and it means that it takes like as the world is shifting to these collaborative methods, a lot of people, especially folks in senior leadership positions, 80% of the projects they worked on might have been in a really disjointed and antagonistic hard bid methodology and mentality. And they're often carrying forward that scar tissue, that assumption that disjointed action is how it has to be into these new interactions.
I'm interested here in your view. You're describing the senior executives who perhaps, let's say, they're in their 50s, their 60s, maybe late 40s, and they come from the old school of we're going to bid it and we're going to build it and we're going to wrestle for change orders and we're probably going to be combative and hopefully we can build another project with these guys, whether it's the subs or the designers, but it's kind of challenging. And yet there's this generational shift that I'm hearing you kind of describe that's underlying all of these things. What do you think is the difference between, let's say, someone who's late millennial Gen Z as compared to, your Gen Xers and your baby boomers in terms of their approach to construction and how that contributes to the new delivery methods that are becoming more prominent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it is the type of experience they've had. I don't think that there's anything special about the kids. I think it's that, let's say you're a project manager at a design firm in your 30s or 40s and you've done like 4 or 5 jobs, but you're a junior for the first two, so you've done 3 jobs and like two of those were pretty antagonistic ones. That's the experience you rest on. 90% of that experience is probably still very valid to this new job. And it's right that you're in this like senior leadership position, but that 10% scar tissue isn't necessarily right to carry forward. I think it's the shape of the experience. I will say the one thing that's different is that the newer generations in the workforce honestly have grown up with a much higher standard around technology, right? A lot of these folks have always been able to press a button on their smartphone and see an Uber show up. They've always been able to order something on Amazon and get up to the minute notifications as it travels across the country over the course of 2 business days to their front door. And carrying that into construction, which is a much more complicated domain than many of these things, but you come to this and you say, this is all we got. So there's a desire to reach for more.
That sounds like it would be really challenging to build trust because of that, not because of even any kind of violations of trust, but the fact that my expectation for delivery as a younger person and transparency is different than the expectation of an older person, perhaps, natively speaking.
That may be. I would also say when we talk to the people that have that scar tissue, they also like people love this industry. People who work in this industry, for the most part, could probably work in other industries. Not everybody, but mostly very proud of the work they do and they love and understand how important construction is. And they've got that scar tissue, but they also have understood what's possible. Like if they've had even that one project that went well and you can remind them of that, then that sparks this thing and they light up. You were asking like what do you do at the outset
Yeah, yeah.
to like really make this happen? I think is you address it really head on. Probably work with the architect, make sure you guys are on the same page. Sometimes this means that you set up regular like a bunch of our customers, I want to say probably the ones working with less sophisticated owners, they have like a weekly cadence of OAC meetings where they go in and they ask the owner to make decision. The contract and the architect will meet ahead of time. And it's not that they're teaming up on the owner. They know that they have divergent interests, but they're straightforward about what that is. But then they're able to go in together and at the very least say, like, okay, unsophisticated owner, I know that you're very excited about the finishes and that
Yep.
you just want to talk about paint colors and fancy Italian light fixtures. Like, but today we need to make these massing changes because we would really like to get concrete out to bid and have people start digging the foundation out because so important for delivering this project on time. So you talk to the owner explicitly about how you're going to work, that you're going to share things, you're going to hold them accountable. They're going to be able to hold you accountable. They're going to be able to see the work that you do. And then you work with the architect as well so that you don't get into an OAC meeting and like architect and contractor are butting heads unnecessarily. They're obviously going to disagree about really substantial things and that's where the owner has to make a decision, but
Yep.
the agenda of the meeting can be, agreed to in advance.
So that's a really good insight right there. Just that idea of having the meeting with the architect prior to the OAC meeting so that you guys are on the same page. So it's like, the parents can have a fight before they get with the kids and talk about what's going on, kind of thing, if they need to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, okay, like you guys sort it out. And then like it's a weird like the kid who is also the parent in a way, right? Because for
Yeah,
these
yeah,
for these
yeah.
owners that are less sophisticated, they're still the customer at the end of the day. They're
They
still
are. They are.
yeah.
So let me ask you this. Let's say you're in the middle of a project and you're looking in the mirror and you're saying, man, this is trust is broken here. We're not doing well. The dude came in with the brown bag from Home Depot and slammed it on the table and did his little song and dance. What can you do to kind of do the reset?
That's tricky. One thing that we have seen work And it requires that the owner's really far gone. But if they put the project back out on the street, they hit some document issuance and they say, like, look, we're going to put this back out, not even for the full construction contract, for new pre-construction services contract, or like maybe we'll go look for a GMP and we're going to look beyond you. We don't trust you gave us the best number. That's a scary place to be, and hopefully you can find ways to reset long before you get to that. But that becomes a way to reset because we know that it happens all the time that owners do this and it's a huge waste of time and money on everyone's part. And they end up with the same team at the end because it turns out that the construction team was working in their best interest and was giving them the best price, and in fact is miles ahead of anyone else in the world in understanding the particular needs of this project. And so they end up, you go out and you rebid it and you end up with the same team again. You get a new kickoff then, and you can start fresh in some ways and really overinvest in communication. I got to imagine in those meetings that you've got I can't imagine walking into that and thinking like, boy, I'm really looking forward to communicating with this owner and owning my mistakes, but that's kind of what you got to do, I think, at those junctures.
So that's interesting, right? The willingness to own your mistakes as soon as possible. In my experience, that is actually one way to build trust and maintain trust when it's been broken, is to be transparent about the mistakes you've made. Not necessarily about how the sausage is made, but the mistakes you've made in the making of the sausage.
Yeah. So here's an example of how you can start to do this. And like, I mean, you can just like you start adopting these processes and you do it directly as you go forward. But like, here's another example. Many projects that we're working with are going sort of milestone to milestone. There might be like 12 milestones on a given project. And there's usually a document issuance like around a milestone where you get a milestone and then you'll think about it and analyze a bunch of things and make it a bunch of different decisions and they get embodied in the documents and you get the new document out and then you maybe do an updated price based on, you've trended in between, but you get this new document set, new price based on the new documents. And you got to reconcile between where we thought we were going to be based on all the decisions we made and where we ended up. And it's complicated. You might have made 50 decisions that changed all sorts of things, and the designers have drawn a bunch of stuff that was just like white paper before, and you've probably sent some stuff. You might have started to bid out a few scopes, and so you're learning things in the market. But being able to come and really crisply explain here's the delta, here's what we attribute to the architect not doing what they said they'd do. We agreed that we'd eliminate 80% of the sunshades on the exterior of the building because it's in a shady location and we don't need them. And the architect only eliminated 40%. That's a miss that we believe is on the architect. This miss is on us. We mispriced it. This miss is just something new that the owner added in scope that wasn't in the previous price. This miss is just something that we learned from the market. This was just a risk that we highlighted where, COVID happened and the lumber price like shot through the roof, or we got new steel tariffs, or it turns out it's impossible to find carpet tile in Northern California right now. And as a result, we learned something from the market that wasn't what we hoped to learn necessarily. Sometimes it's good news, but often it's not. And being able to break it down and explain that, like it means that it's a human thing. It's this like reciprocity thing where it's like, okay, like I'm saying this was my mistake, and you added a 4-story atrium like halfway through construction documentation. We're able to understand where price changes come from. And price is a really big source of contention.
So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about Join and how you guys are addressing this problem of building trust and helping contractors and designers and owners to work together in order to get projects built that are where everyone's happy.
I would love to. On these collaborative projects where the construction team is brought in early, there's a lot more people around the table. There are a lot more overlapped activities. There's a lot more going on. And keeping track of all of that information, keeping it in one place that's coherent and up to date and accurate is a big challenge. And then communicating that out to all of the different stakeholders is a big challenge. And so we have built a software platform that does that. So we typically go to market through general contractors who, without us, are usually the air traffic controllers around a huge, complicated pre construction spreadsheet that might have a constructability log and a value engineering log and 17 other things besides, where there are air traffic controllers and shuttling emails around and trying to merge different versions of the spreadsheet and all that. And we replace that with a software platform that they can bring all the other stakeholders to with the right information compartmentalization so people aren't peeking at bonding rates or other things that they shouldn't. And in doing that,
you centralize it, and you mean it's always up to date, and you don't have issues with like formula errors and so forth. And then the other thing we've got on top of that, sitting on top of that data, one thing that our teams reflect as being very important in building trust is being able to very quickly create very simple reports that sit on top of this. As an example, let's say you're a contractor and you're completely committed to having the owner understand everything about how the cost sausage was made. And so you've done your complete detailed takeoff and estimate, and you're going to share all your markups and all your labor rates and all your unit costs, everything you think. You send all this over to the owner, and they look at this 20,000 line spreadsheet and say, what do I do with this? How do I interpret or understand this? They don't need that information. They need that information grouped and presented in a simple way, but grouped and presented in a language that makes sense to them. So inside of Join, there's like very flexible categorization. You're able to slice and dice this data in many different ways very easily so that you can walk into a meeting and say, okay, here's like, owner, you want to understand this in terms of your own budget and which budget we're drawing from to pay for different things inside the building. And okay, like let's pivot it because the architect doesn't care that we're way over an electrical conduit. They want to understand how we're spending money in programmatic areas. And like here, we can show both of them. And if there's some other filtering or grouping we need to do, we're able to do it all on the fly. And that means that often you need kind of a new report to like answer a question, right? And it means if you have to ask like, okay, like I need to see this report, like, and it takes a week to come back, is that going to help build trust? Like, what's this person doing? Why does it take a week to get me this report to answer these questions? Other stuff is also going on by the side. And it turns out if you're pushing these numbers around in Excel, it just like takes a long time to create all these reports, and it's instant in Join.
So let me ask you, who is your software package not for?
Yeah, great question. I'd say it's firms who believe that design bid build is the future of their business. Probably not a great fit for us.
So hard bid contractors, design bid build, that's not a fit for you.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. How did you get to the point where you are involved in the construction industry? What was your journey?
Oh, it's kind of a funny one. I grew up in the 3D printing world. Actually, my background's in software engineering, and I was doing customized medical devices.
So look, I got to stop you. I got to stop you. Sorry. Are we ever going to get 3D printing in construction that is realistic and not totally ugly?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't either. I was just wondering what you thought.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if you look at where it's succeeded in other industries, large parts made from low performance materials and relatively simple geometries just like isn't, you don't need to 3D print it. Like you need a bigger machine than the thing it is that you're printing in order to do it, and that limits site applicability, and you always have to compromise the materials to 3D print it. And that's why you often see it in like fixtures, right? So like custom hearing aids, you don't print the hearing aid, you print the mold that then the hearing aid is cast with, right? And because the mold doesn't actually need to be performed very well. So anyway, it's probably more detail than you're interested in.
Yes, sidebar on the
Yeah.
3D. So tell us how you got there into construction.
So I saw a job posting from a company that was a Google X spinout that was doing sort of customized design tools, cloud computational design tools for architects and engineers, and thought, well, these like hearing aids and other medical devices are cool, but there are a lot more buildings than there are like, hand braces like in the world, and they're bigger, and it seemed interesting. And so I jumped there, and that was an interesting ride. Company got a few things right and several things wrong, but met the founding team through that, founding team of what became Join through that. And we knew that there were opportunities around sort of this decision making space. We knew that like, hey, owners just like, they got to make a lot of choices. Every building's unique. It's very hard to get to the data that like guides those decisions. We knew there were opportunities there, and we thought it's going to be, you're going to laugh. We thought the opportunities were all inside the design tools. That designer is very naive of us, where the designer sits in front of the design tool and makes all the decisions and informs the other stakeholders, right? And so we tried that for a little bit. Fortunately, before we ran out of money, sort of found our way to the OAC meeting and the collaboration issues that arise around there, and did a bunch of discovery meetings and conversations with construction teams around the country to understand these particular problems, and that led us to where we are today.
What do you do differently? Because I know around the construction space, and I've had many of these folks on my podcast, is there's tons of guys and gals who are coming with tech solutions to the industry. What are you doing differently in terms of your approach, your perspective, that other software companies aren't, that sets you apart?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing, and none of this we're not like totally unique in each of the things I'm going to mention, but I think together they set us apart in a few ways. Like one, we think people are always going to solve construction problems. We think it's all about the people. The team has a stack of patents in all sorts of domains where computers come in and use things that look like artificial intelligence to solve like very complex problems. Like we can build anything that a computer can do. And it's tempting to look at construction and say, like, you don't need people. Like all buildings are actually similar enough. The computer can make all the decisions, right? And
Right.
like, no, we don't think so. We think it's all about the people and getting the right people at the right time with the right context and with enough trust that they can work together to move the project forward. We're pretty unabashed about that.
So that would be almost sort of a modest approach to what tech can actually accomplish. It can accomplish a lot, but at the end of the day in construction, the relationships between the people are absolutely vital.
Yeah, I mean, we've been humility is one of our company values. We hire for it, we demand it, and everyone who's customer facing. Yeah, we think technology can help a lot, but we don't. Technology isn't going to go build a building. It's always people who will make the most interesting decisions, who are the most important players. Okay, like we thought, I mean, early on, we thought maybe the technology can do all this. Maybe we can automate all of it. And there were two things that changed it. One, we were talking to an architect who was very proudly describing how he was working on what was going to become the largest passive house certified development in the world in New York, and how they had this problem because they needed these exterior doors on every floor to do maintenance in a certain area. And passive house is all about like how well sealed the building is, essentially. And they couldn't find exterior doors that like would hold enough air pressure to be able to meet it. And eventually they figured out that what they needed was they needed to find the people who manufactured walk-in freezer doors and have them scale it appropriately and change some of the finishes so that it could go on the outside of the building. And it's like, how is a computer going to suggest that? Like, there's no way that a computer is going to be that creative anytime soon. Like, there's so many steps between here and there. And the other, yeah,
So
I mean,
AI will not be overcoming construction
yeah,
people anytime soon, huh?
yeah, we don't think so.
I know when you were in university, you ran cross country and track and field. So I have a quick question for you. And if you don't have a good answer for this, it's okay. What's the fastest way or the best way for me to improve my 5K time?
Depends where you're starting from, but
So let's say I'm a beginner and I have a goal. I want to run, I don't know, what's a good 5K time? Let's say I want to run a good 7-minute mile. I'm not an expert by any means or a uber athlete, but I really want to get to that 7-minute mile point.
probably going to need a few months to train up. And what you want to do is you want to get in a habit of running regularly,
Mhm.
so several times a week, but not too much that you get hurt. A lot of running training is sort of the balance between training stimulus and injury. And fortunately for beginners, as long as you're not too crazy, there's a lot of improvements that could be had without getting to the point that you're getting hurt. A lot of what's important is like a gradual buildup, and you want some variety in what you do. You want one of those runs to be longer. It's like you want to run a good 5K. You're probably going to run longer than 5K in your training runs. And you're probably going to run faster than 7-minute miles in parts of your training runs. And you probably want to do some strides and some speed work. And it's about just exercising different aspects of sort of the bodily system that lets you run. Then the parts and pieces come together and you're able to get together a good 5K.
So as we're wrapping up here, Andrew, just give us a summary here. If I'm a general contractor, I'm looking to really focus in on that vital element of building trust with the project partners, the various entities involved in the projects I build. How can I go about doing that?
Yeah, show your work, start from the beginning, and look for opportunities to deploy technology that'll make it easier for your teams to do that.
Excellent. And then with that in mind, how can we get in touch with you, Andrew?
Great. We got a website, join.build. You can reach out to people on the team if anybody's interested in learning more. And then my email address is andrew@join.build. And love to hear from anyone listening to the show.
Excellent. Andrew, I really appreciate your generosity today. All the links will be in the show notes so people can check out your company. And I do wish you the very best.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Hey, this is Eric. Just before you bounce, I want to thank you again for listening to today's episode. Make sure you check out the links in the show notes to get in touch with Andrew if you'd like to learn more about what he does. And again, as I asked at the beginning of the show, I'm going to ask it one more time. Please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. And that helps the Construction Genius show to be multiplied in its visibility across the interwebs. And so the more construction leaders who get a chance to listen to the show, the more they can benefit from the killer content. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. I'll catch you on the next episode.